us?
I am.
Okay, take a look at
Okay.
and Beverly, you're a techie person also. Take a look at it if it came in.
All right. Well, it's kind of hard while I'm going to be starting up, so I'll look at it in a bit. I'm going to put my email in the chat. So
because she's pretty thorough, she even puts where it's located on the map.
okay, so I put my email in there in case somebody has an issue they can share. Okay, I just got Fran, I got your thing, which is a PDF. So
yeah, I like that you put the map on it with the.
Oh, she did a beautiful job.
She did.
Yeah, she did a great job.
Yeah, which gives you a little history of the area which she did.
Yeah, no, she did a beautiful job. Wow, I'm impressed. Yeah, no, this is
okay.
This is awesome.
So if you want to put some of these things on, how do we do it?
Well, I guess toward the end of your talk, if there's something special you want to show, you would just tell me and I'll search for it, I guess. I don't know how long it would take.
Talking about the beginning of the talk, like I like what she did, the map of Europe, which tells you with a little red dot of where it is. So that comes in the beginning.
Okay, do you feel, Beverly, like it's going to be too complicated to kind of at the last minute? I feel like we have people waiting and it's already 11:04 and we only have an hour
on this, Fran. So because there's no way to integrate it at the last minute like this, but for the next speech. Okay, so we should get started. People are going to just sign in when they sign in. Okay. All right, I'll start off. I want to thank everybody on the team who helped me make this happen, including our tech, Josh Gordon, Fran, our speaker, Marjorie, who's helping moderate, as well as Stacy from the Holocaust Council of Greater Metro West. They helped me provide Fran for today, and thanks everyone who signed up. I am a member of the Center for Peace, Justice, and Reconciliation here at Bergen Community College. But most importantly, I am a child of Holocaust survivors. So I know how important it is to share these stories so that history doesn't repeat itself. So now I want to introduce our moderator for today, Marjorie Feinstein from the Holocaust Council of Greater Metro West. Marjorie is a retired communications professor from St. Elizabeth University, where she currently serves as the advisory board chair for their Holocaust and Genocide Education Center. Marjorie also serves on the education board of the American Society for Yad Vashem, and for the past 30 years, she's been passionate about sharing the lessons of the Holocaust so we don't repeat them in the current. And it's all yours, Marjorie.
Thank you so much, Beverly. Most important, thank you all for taking the time out of your busy days, busy time frame to join us today. You can see me, but I can't see you, but I'm very grateful for your presence. Briefly, because survivors are aging, we are all today very privileged and blessed to hear a first-hand account from Fran, with whom you're going to share her testimony. But before we do that, I'm going to give you a homework assignment for just a moment. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for just a second. I'm going to ask you to think about a person in your life or persons who you will see within the next 48 hours that you will share what you have learned today. And you can open your eyes. And as you think of this individual, I want you to think of yourself as a witness, because you are soon going to be able to be the voice for so many who cannot speak. Survival of memory is very, very, very important. And you are now going to become witnesses to Fran's story. Fran will speak for herself, and I'm sure you'll be enthralled by what she's going to be sharing with you. But briefly, she was born in Sokol near Lvov, Poland in 1938, and she grew up in an Orthodox family. In 1939, Russia occupied her town, and under communist rule, her family's possessions were taken away and strangers occupied their home. In the spring of 1941, Germany invaded Poland, and when they came to Sokol, they required all Jewish-abled men between the ages of 16 to 60 to report to the town square for labor. 400 Jewish men, including her father, were taken to a brick factory and shot. And our speaker today, Fran Malkin, was only 2 years old at that time. The family was later forced into the ghetto. In the fall of 1942, the family went into hiding, and they were among 16 people who were hidden for 2 years. It is my absolute honor and privilege to introduce Fran Malkin to you, who will speak for a while, share her testimony, and then we're going to open up for questions which you can share with Beverly, or we will make provisions for you to ask questions of her. Fran, I'm delighted to know you, and I invite you to share your story.
Thank you, Marjorie. Thank you all for attending. I'm looking at a picture just of me. This is different than Zoom, what I'm used to. So bear with me a little bit as I tell my story. Marjorie gave you a good summary of the beginning of my life. I was born in a town called Sokol, which at that time was in Poland. It's now in the Ukraine. And I was born in 1938, tells you my age. And I guess I was born into the war. So my family, my mother and father, had a nice business in town. I'll show you the picture. That's my mother and father. If you can see what I'm talking about, they had a confectionery store. They brought in chocolates and other confectionery items from around Europe, especially Germany, would you believe? And this was their place of business. So when I used to ask my mother, with all these terrible things happening, why didn't you leave? She said to me, we had a good life. Why was I going to leave? And that's what really many immigrant communities, when you're comfortable in your home, you don't run away. The first thing that happened, as Marjorie told you, is the Germans came into our town. Now, sorry, I had to pick something up. Since I was very young, I'm basing some of my story on a diary my uncle, that's my uncle, and that he kept, and it was translated by his sons into the English. So what Marjorie told you is when the Germans first came into our town, they had all the able-bodied Jewish men come out to the center of town, and they selected 400 of the most successful people in town. They said they were taking them out for work, labor. And until 2 years later, we didn't know what happened. They took these 400 Jewish men away. 2 years later, no, not 2 years, a few after the war, we found out they were taken out to a brick factory on the outskirts of town and shot them, made them dig their own graves and shot them. That became a very common experience for the way the Germans dealt with the Jews. You know, you always hear about concentration camps and being murdered. Well, there's a French priest who's been out speaking to all these communities in the Ukraine and Poland and Russia, Lithuania, and they tell them where the killing fields are. And he figures another 1.5 million Jews were murdered in these killing fields. And they had, they called them Einsatzgruppen, who followed the armies. And when they came into a town where there was a Jewish population, small towns, say in Poland or Ukraine, they pulled out all the Jewish men and shot them. Our town, I found out from Father Dubois, who's the priest who's doing this search, was the first town this happened in. My mother told me my father came over to me, picked me up. I was 2 years old. He hugged me, he kissed me, he cried, he wept, and he went out. I don't know if he had a premonition. I only have like a handful of pictures of him to remember him by. Okay, then the next thing the Nazis did when they came into these towns was they created ghettos. They started putting Jews in ghettos. Well, there was a reason for that. You hear about ghettos, and my first memories of this was I was 3.5 years old, 4 years old, being in a ghetto. They had, I remember my mother sewing yellow stars and putting them on clothes. I remember that. And what they did is they forced all the Jews to come into this area that was several square blocks enclosed by barbed wire. And there was a purpose. I'm going to hang this up. There was a purpose for this because now the Germans had the Jews in one place. Since Hitler's purpose was to kill every Jew, that was the plan, every Jew. And this way, they would be all located in one place when they took him away. So this was, I call it industrial killing plans. Everything was planned. In our town, there was a railroad. The railroad ran to a death camp called Belzec, which is not very well known because it was a gas. When people got to Belzec, they were gassed. You got out of the train, you went to the gas chamber, you were gassed, they burned the bodies. That was the plan. I have been told that about 850,000 Jews were gassed in Belzec. Nobody survived Belzec. Auschwitz, which you've heard of, was a work camp and a death camp. They needed the labor of the Jews who were working then to help them with the million people they killed in Auschwitz. But anybody who was able to survive that period survived, which was either pure luck or some determination. So what they did in our town was they had, by the way, I will allow anybody who wants to interrupt if I'm not making, to get more details on my comments that I'm saying. So just raise your hand, and I know some of our techie people would be able to answer or put you through. Anyhow, our ghetto was enclosed by barbed wire. There was this train that ran there. Now, the plan was they would have these, what they called Aktions, the Germans called them Aktions. They would come into the town. All these people were crammed into these small houses. I can't say I remember them because, like I said, I was 3.5, 4 years old. They would round up as many people as they were able to capture. They would put them in these cattle cars. They would take him over. The cars would go to Belzec. They would be gassed in Belzec and then come back empty. There were 3 of these actions in our town. The third one was the final solution in our town. Now, my mother had a brother, she had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. One of her brothers worked on these trains. I showed you the diary my uncle kept. I'd like to read you a paragraph where you get an idea of what these trains were like. One Sunday, my brother stops at my house as usual on his way home from the railroad station. He seems ready to burst into tears. What happened, I ask him. It takes quite a while before he's able to talk. He pulls a bundle of papers from his bag and hands it to me. He says, these are the documents found in a railroad car that he and other Jewish workers had to clean today. So the Germans had Jewish workers working in the trains. The car was part of a train that returned empty from the death camp of Belzec. He and his friends also found American dollar bills torn into small pieces. Apparently, the deportees who owned these dollar bills destroyed them on the journey to Belzec so that the Nazi Ukrainian murderers should not be able to use them. In addition, he and his friends picked up children's clothes and identification papers bearing an official Nazi seal and giving the age of the holders as 18. Look at these papers, he says. Do you think it's still worthwhile to go on living? I read you this paragraph because everybody hears about these death camps and the trains. This is how it worked. Now, my family felt the only way you could defeat the Nazis and the Germans, you couldn't fight them. There was nothing you could do, was to survive. So when he says, do you think it's still worthwhile to go on living? Yes, that's what he meant. And you had to fight for that very hard. So what my uncles did, which he talks about in the diary, is they would sneak out of the ghetto at night, and they lived in that community forever, generations. And they would go see their neighbors, their Polish neighbors, because that area was Ukrainian and Polish. The Ukrainians were on the side of the Nazis. So he would go and talk to these Polish people he knew and ask them to hide his family. And everyone said no, because if you were discovered hiding Jews, they would murder you and your family also. They would hang you in the public square as a lesson to others. Or if your neighbors wanted to get some extra money and extra goods, they can turn you into the Germans. And so there was an incentive to turn people in. So he writes about it. He would sneak out of the ghetto and go talk to people, and everybody turned him down. And then he found one woman, he knew her. Her name was Francesca Alamayaba. It's her photo. She lived with her daughter. Her daughter worked in the post office. And she said, I'll hide your family. I remember one of these actions, the second action. Somebody, I guess my mother grabbed me and took me into a pantry because we hid. Many people hid when they knew an action was coming, when the Germans were attacking. And so I went in there. There were about 20 people in this little pantry, and I was sitting on my grandfather's lap the whole time. And there was a little boy crying that he's thirsty. And we whispered, because the Germans were all around the house. This was in the house, with some kind of a pantry or basement. I don't know. And we whispered, he's got to drink something or else they'll catch us. And his father urinated into a cup and gave him to drink. The ghetto period was, so we survived that action. That was the second one. The ghetto period there was a lot of disease in the ghetto. Typhus was one of the main diseases. There were many of them. There was no medication. There was, you either died or you lived. I had typhus and I was 4 years old. My mother had typhus. Typhus is a horrible sickness that I remember. People would get very high fevers at night. During the day, they were quiet, but at night, they would become delirious. They would jump around. They would scream. They really became crazy. And I remember an incident my mother used to talk about. Her brother came over. They were both deliriously sick. And he put his hands around her neck. And he said, oh, my sister, I love you so much. And he started squeezing her neck. And they had to pull him off. So you either survived typhus or you didn't, or any of the other diseases. So many people died in the ghettos before. And my mother had a sister who had tuberculosis, which was a very contagious, and she probably picked it up in the ghetto. So when my family made plans to go into hiding, because since my uncle worked at the railroad, he knew when the final action was going to be, and that was the third one. We snuck out of the ghetto that night. Now, they brought along a doctor, his wife, and 2 sons with us because they had a very sick sister and they were looking for help there. So I remember all of us walking about, must have been about a mile and a half, 2 mile walk along this river from the ghetto to her house. Her name was Francesca Halamiota. Now, I'll skip ahead a moment. In 2007, we went back to Soco and we made a film of our experiences. This is the film, Number 4 Street of Our Lady. And we also used the diary because there are 3 of us as a narration. There are 3 of us still alive today, and we were all three kids then. So we did this walk again. It was about almost 2 miles we walked. And we got to her house. She had a little house. Now, these houses in these small towns in Poland, they're very small. They're not what you consider in America a house. They're attached to each other. One neighbor's on top of the other neighbor. Everything is together. She had a barn in the back of her house. We walked to the barn and we got into the barn and there were pigs downstairs on the ground floor. There was a ladder that led up to a trap door. We moved the trap door and we walked into a hay loft. There was hay on the floor, it was this type of roof. And there were 13 of us at that point. So there were 13 of us who went into this hay loft and hid to hide. Now, my particular story is, since I was the youngest, I was 4 years old. And when children are scared, they cry. Now, before we went into hiding, both my mother's brothers had a discussion. What are they going to do with me? Because it was very dangerous to cry because these were very flimsy places and people would hear you. Your neighbors were next door. The Germans were all around. They were liquidating the ghetto. The area was filled with Germans. So one of them suggested, why don't you put her in front of a convent or a church? And that was not an uncommon thing to do. Is a number of Jews put little young children in front of convents or into convents, and the nuns and priests would raise them. And today, many Jews are finding out whose parents were killed in the war. They never came to pick them up. They're finding out years later that they're Jewish because now they're being told by whoever hid them. So that's in Eastern Europe a pretty common story. So one of my uncles said, put her in, take her over to a church, leave her there. I promised I wasn't going to cry. And then we got there and I got up and I climbed up those stairs and somewhere I started crying and I couldn't stop crying and I just cried. And this I remember, I was 4 years old. My uncle describes it better than I can describe it. Okay, so I'd like to read you a few paragraphs. I'll skim through it. My little 4-year-old niece, he uses my Yiddish name, Feiga Chashe, but it's me, won't stop crying. We all beg her to keep quiet, but nothing helps. And I remember crying. Mrs. Holomayava comes up and says, for mercy's sake, can you people make that child stop crying? Do you want the Germans to find you and kill us all? Because they would have killed her and her daughter also. She takes a stick and begins to beat the pigs. She hopes their squeaks of pain will drive out the sounds of Feiga crying. The hours go by, Feiga is still crying. We are all terrified. Mrs. Holomayava and Hella, that's her daughter, are still beating the pigs, but how much longer can they keep this up? At about 8 o'clock that evening, Mrs. Holomayava knocks on our hayloft door with her stick. Now, the way we had it was we put up this ladder, but when she would bring us food or take our waste away or come to talk to us, she would have a broom, a stick, and she would knock on the hayloft door and we would move the door and she would talk to us. So the hours go by and Faye's still crying. We're all terrified. At about 8 o'clock that evening, Mrs. Holomayava knocks on our hayloft door with her stick. We open the door. You'll have to do something, she says, very much upset. If this crying goes on, it'll be the end for all of us. We promise her we'll do something. After she has left, we huddle together and discuss what we should do. We come to a terrible decision. We will have to kill Feiga Chashe with poison from Dr. Kindler's medical bag. We can't endanger 14 other lives, those of our family, the doctor and his 2 children and wife, and the Holomayavas because of 1 child. We report our decision to Mrs. Holomayava. She doesn't say a word. What could she say? Feiga Chashe goes on crying. Now, the reason the doctor brought poison with him is in case we're captured, we would kill ourselves. We cover Feiga Chashe with blankets. Dr. Kindler pours a spoonful of poison from one of his vials and forces the spoon between Feiga Chashe lips. Feiga Chashe makes a face, spits it out, and keeps on crying. I remember them pushing a pill in, might have been both. And I was begging them at that point, leave me alone, I'll stop crying. But I didn't stop crying. Finally, some of the poison seems to stay in. After a few minutes, Feiga Chashe stops crying. Her eyes fall shut. She appears unconscious. She does not seem to be breathing. We all squat around the little figure in the straw, as if we were already sitting Shiva. No one makes a sound. My sister Leah, Feiga's mother, does not weep. I forgive you for what you have done to my child, she whispers, as long as God forgives you too. 1 life for a chance to save 14 other lives, actually 16. My mother told me what her plan was when they were going to take my body down, she was going to jump off and jump into that river that we walked along, because that was right next to Miss Salmayova's house. 2 hours later, at about 10 o'clock, Mrs. Salmayova comes to us holding out a large burlap bag. "The child's soul is with God now," she says, in a voice that betrays no emotion. "Put her in the bag. I'll bury her." Dr. Kindler leans forward to pick up the limp little body from the straw. As he touches the child, his sensitive hands feel something unexpected. He motions to me and whispers in my ear, "There's a pulse, it's faint, but I can feel it. The child is alive." It takes a moment to grasp what the doctor is saying. Then I say that if the child wasn't killed by the dose of poison he gave her, it is nothing short of a miracle. Figo was meant to live. I remember that incident. We spent 20 months in hiding in that hayloft. To me, it's mostly a blur when people ask me, "What did you do there?" I know a few times when I cried, they would put a pillow on my face, but I stopped crying. We played chess. There were 2 other children. My mother's sister died from tuberculosis. I remember them taking her down. Us children watched from behind. We peeked out from behind a sheet as they took her down at night and buried her behind an apple tree in Miss Salmayova's garden. We were right on the Russian border, our town. So there was a lot of fighting between Germany and Russia, German soldiers, Russian soldiers on our town. Now, I do want to add one thing now. We were never hungry. We were fed. Mrs. Halmayova brought us up food. She had a garden in her backyard, so fresh vegetables, which today they charge more money farm to table. She had the pigs. I guess she slaughtered them and cooked. We did give her money so she could go out and buy food in town. And we were never hungry. She also took away our waste. And she risked her life for almost 2 years that we could have been caught, because there were German soldiers quartered. I'll tell you one incident, because there were many, in her house, because we were on the Russian border, and that's where the battle was going on into Russia. And her neighbors, who were many Ukrainians, would put notices on her door: "You must leave. They want her property." And at one point she came to us, she says, "You're going to have to leave. What can we do?" And we pleaded with her and we begged her. And her daughter worked for the post office. She was a pretty woman. So she started making parties for these German soldiers that were quartered in her house and all around town. She would invite the Germans to come to her house, and she'd make dinners and parties for them. And so her neighbors thought she was a Nazi and she was allied with the German soldiers, and they left her alone. She was incredible. I don't know who would think of these things. We spent 22 months there. The battle was going on in our town because the Russian soldiers were coming in, the German military was leaving. And our family felt that it was safer to go home to our homes than to stay in that barn. That's when we found out from Miss Salmayeva that she had a Jewish family of 3 people, mother, father, son, in her basement. It was a hole under her kitchen. And she was hiding them for the 2 years that she hid us. And we didn't know about them, and they didn't know about us for 2 years. And I spoke to the son of the family, and he said his mother helped her cook at night these big dishes, and she couldn't understand. There were only a few of them in the house. Why was she cooking so much? The Russians came into our house, into our town. They took over. The Germans were gone. That's when we found out from the Ukrainian neighbors what had happened to my father and the other 4 factory and outskirts of town.
Fran, may I open our conversation to, first of all, bringing some questions in as you complete your thoughts. I want to add the Hebrew words Yasher Koach. May you continue to go from strength to strength. As we open the door to Beverly, asking some questions as people want to know the remainder of your story, I couldn't help but get chills thinking of my own children at that age and my own grandkids now. Your voice is very powerful, and the survival of memory of this incredible story lies in our hands. I'm going to let you have an opportunity to complete some of your remarks so we can open the door to Beverly's moderating some questions.
Okay. All right. The only thing I wanted to add is when we found out that my father and these other men were murdered, my mother said there is no life for us here anymore. That's when we left, and we started another journey. And that was 1944, and I came to America in 1949. So our journey still continued of survival. So I will be happy to answer any questions or comments or whatever.
Before I turn it over to Beverly, I really want to give a heartfelt thanks to Bergen Community College for sponsoring this Survivor Speak with our Holocaust Council of Greater Metro West. Fran, I am privileged to be a voice to pass on your story, and we have so many others who are going to complete their homework assignment by passing on elements of what you've shared with us today so that we can retell the story in your name. Thank you. Beverly?
Okay. All right. So far, I have a question that was emailed in. Did you ever feel afraid that you had to hide your identity here in America for fear of persecution?
I can't say I did. When we came to America, we we were sponsored by my mother's uncle, and the whole family came. And we lived in Newark, and we lived in an area that was all Holocaust survivors lived there. And I went to a school, Weequahic High School in Newark, which was very popular then in my neighborhood. And I was surrounded really by Jewish communities. To my knowledge, I never had to hide my being Jewish in this country. No. I can't think of an incident where I had to say, oh, I can't tell them I'm Jewish. No.
Yes.
But I think communities I lived in, my daughter lives in New York. I spent a lot of time in New York and New Jersey. I can't, I don't think I've traveled into areas. I don't think until recently that you heard of much anti-Semitism actively in this country. And that's why everybody thought of it as this was, you know, you could go to Israel, you could go to America. This was a haven, Canada, other countries. But I personally can't say I came across anti-Semitism here. Now, there may have been anti-Semitism. I may not have been hired for a certain job because somebody, but I'm not aware of it.
Okay, I have another question. What happened to Hella and her mother, and did you ever go back and visit them?
Okay, Hella and her mother, Hella had to leave when the Germans came in. And that story gets even a little more complicated. And they moved to Poland because Sokol became the Ukraine. So they left Sokol and they moved to Poland, which was, you know, not that far away from there. Hella had 4 kids. Her Francesca also had a son. He would come and speak to us. And he worked for a German company. And he told his mother, as a matter of fact, he encouraged her to take us in and hide us. He would come to speak to us, and I remember him. He would speak in Yiddish. For some reason, he seemed to know it because at that time I spoke Polish and I spoke Yiddish. After the war, he was helping people living in the woods, Jews hiding in the woods, and he was captured. He was killed. So when the war was over, she lost him. She lost her home, and she wound up living with her daughter. We always sent them packages. We bought them a house. We were in constant contact with them. But then Francesca died. Helena died. After Helena died, one of her daughters found a letter from my mother. And she contacted my mother because at that time they had moved to Connecticut. Her and her sister and her brother, they moved to Connecticut. She contacted my mother and said, who are you? What's going on? She never told her grandkids about it, about us hiding, because we would send packages to them and they'd say, who's sending us like M&M candies? And they said, our friends in America. And the doctor had gone to Israel and he also sent them packages. So when she contacted my mother, we got together with them and we had them registered as righteous among the nations in Jerusalem at Yad Vashem. When we made this film, when we went back to Sawcoast in 2007, they came with us, the two daughters, which is two of Francesca's granddaughters. And it's the first time they had been to Sawcoast. So if you see the film, and it's a 90-minute film, it tells our whole story. And it does some narration from the diary because, like I said, the three of us who are still alive were children. The film is number 4, Street of Our Lady. It can be streamed on Amazon.
Yeah, I put it on the chat.
Yeah, but Grace and Yolanta are in the film with us, and they've been involved in some of this. But she didn't tell them about it because, and they told us this, their neighbors in Poland did not like Jews, Polish people who had saved Jews. So they kept it a secret.
Okay.
And they didn't find out about it until she found a letter from my mother after they had died.
I want to mention that Fran's daughter is in the audience to also answer questions, Debbie Pierce. So I'm grateful, thank you, and a great presentation you put together. Here's another question. Let's see if I can find it. Do you see any parallels between the years and the propaganda leading up to the Holocaust and what's happening today?
I think there's a lot of hatred being spread now, and I don't know where it's going. I think, there are many America is a country of immigrants originally. So there are many people of many descents, colors, races, religions in this country. And until right now, I would say there's a lot of there are a lot of issues in separating people. And for 100 years, I'd say since the Civil War, America has been a country that has been trying to unite all people. And they were doing a pretty good job because inclusion was the purpose of a nation of immigrants. And lately, there seems to be a lot of this, you're this religion, you're this, you're that. And I think the propaganda might even be worse than what people are doing. I think there's just an awful lot. And I think they're playing with fire by doing it. Because the purpose of America, its founding, its history, was inclusion. And I know there was the slave trade, which excluded all the population. But then a civil war was fought in this country where over 600,000 Americans were killed to free the slaves and to bring together and it took another 100 years with Martin Luther King to say to preach for inclusivity And now there just seems to be a trying to tear people apart. I don't know. I don't know where that's going. It's I liked it the way it was. I liked Martin Luther King's message
Me too.
of inclusiveness, not exclusion. So I don't know where this next phase is going.
Yeah, it scares me as well because I'm a big fan of Martin Luther King, and you know, it's not the color of your skin, it's the quality of your character. And now we have CRT, the critical race theory, which to me just reminds me of Aryan race theory. What's the difference? We're dividing us by skin color, hair color, eye color, oppressor versus you're a victim or you're an oppressor. If my parents were alive today, because they have light skin, they'd be considered oppressors, even though they're Holocaust survivors. So I don't know. It's
Yeah, there seems to be. I think the media is flaming that. I don't think people are flaming it as much as the media.
I think
the media, the enemy of the people. Okay,
one
Marjorie.
of the messages that's resounding from this discussion is that we need to be upstanders rather than bystanders. And Fran, you've reminded us of that. And you've reminded me of the need to open my door to those who need my help. And I think everyone on this connection has gotten another opportunity to remember how important it is to be other oriented, or as you've suggested, inclusive. I never use the word tolerance. I use the word affirmation of others.
Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of that has been, there's too much negativity going on, too many voices trying to rip people apart. There shouldn't be. My other message that I want to add that I usually say is when I came to this country, because we spent, after the war, we spent another 5 years traveling through Europe, and we were in displaced persons camps. And we came to Newark, and we lived in an area where all our neighbors were Holocaust survivors. You know, people feel comfortable with people who have similar stories. And it was a very important message to everybody, was to go on with our lives. And they really didn't want to play this terrible thing happened to you, so now your life is over. We knew it happened. And I think this is to me, that seems to be a lesson that I try to tell people when I speak to, is what I saw, that you have to fight to go on with your life. You can't, things happen to everybody, and you can't let it defeat you. You have to go on and make a life. And that was a very important lesson I saw to my friends, my neighbors. I lived with, my friends were my age. They were all Holocaust. We never knew each other's story. I never talked to my mother or my uncles or anybody about it until I made this film. And then they were all gone. So talk to your grandparents. Everybody has a story. And we just didn't talk about it. But to me, the important lesson is that you have, things happen, and you can't let it defeat you. You have to go.
How are we doing on time? I do have maybe one or two questions more, and then I have a follow-up. So Marjorie, we can take maybe one more question, or what do you think?
I think we have time for one more question. Again, I'm just going to close Yasha Koach to you again. Continue to go from strength to strength. May we remember your story. And I'm hoping that all of us will complete our homework assignments by passing on what you've shared to further our instincts to become upstanders so that the survival of memory becomes primary in all of our lives. Beverly, thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much. And there's one more question, and then I'm going to do a wrap up. What do you think is the most important lesson that you want young people to take away from your talk?
Well, what I was saying before, things happen to people, and we may not be able to change the world entirely, but we can't let them defeat us. And I find when I speak to schools, and some schools write to me, the kids, and this was the lesson many of them mentioned, that things happen, you got to go on. You have to keep moving.
You have to push
And
through.
that's because most Holocaust survivors who went through the worst kind of hell, every story is different. They went on with their lives. They wouldn't let them. So
thank you so much, Fran, for sharing your heartfelt story. I knew some of it from watching the Amazon, but it's just very heartfelt to hear you actually tell it and reading those passages from your uncle's story. I'd like to share my screen because I want to show a few, not the full PowerPoint, but one or two slides. So share, I'm going to share my screen now. Okay.
I'm still trying to figure out WebEx.
Okay, here is, we talked a little bit about
Oh,
the
yeah,
media.
I like that picture. Okay.
Okay, this is from the U.S. Holocaust Museum website.
Yes, okay. That
And this,
picture, can I explain it to you?
oh, sure.
Okay. That was taken in 1986 when Francesca's granddaughters contacted us. Her, in the last picture, in the rear, left end row, left, middle, and next to him, those are her granddaughters, and the rest of the people are me, my aunt, my mother, my uncles. They were still alive. This was 1986, and this is when they were inducted into the righteous among the Gentiles at Yad Vashem.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to share this article from the Holocaust Museum because I am concerned seeing the propaganda here on our news stations. It scares me because this is how it started. It started with propaganda. You know, that was the key. The newspapers, books, meetings, rallies, and any viewpoint that wasn't pro-Nazi, anything that was against the government's, you know, those were threatening to the government and they were censored. And I feel like that's happening today and it's very scary. But to me, it's not just what they say, the lies that they say, but it's also what they don't say. For example, how many of you in the audience knew about the firebombs in Israel? You know, sometimes I only see negative portrayal of Israel on the news and it upsets me. Here, there were all these firebombs, you know, over 2,500 acres of Israel was burned and the media was silent. You know, it just is, to me, it's very upsetting.
I agree.
Yeah, it's scary to me.
Thank you for sharing these very
One more
important slides.
One more slide I want to just show is the good news is even with the media lies and censorship, there are watchdog organizations. So I wanted to share the top 3 here if anyone's interested. We have UN Watch corrects any lies happening there against Israel. There's Camera, Committee for Accuracy and Mideast Reporting. And thankfully, there's other organizations as well that you can check out. So I just wanted to share that, and I'll stop sharing. Okay. Thank you so much to Fran, and thank you so much, Marjorie, and thank you to all the attendees. I'm sorry we did not get a chance to get to everybody's questions. I can certainly forward whatever questions you have for, for follow-up.
Okay with me, if you want to forward any, I'll send you back an answer.
Okay, I could do that.
Beverly, to you and to Bergen Community College, especially to Joshua Gordon, who enabled this to happen.
Thank you, Josh.
Joshua worked tirelessly to get us all connected. Debbie, thank you for joining us with your mom. It is really our privilege. And Fran, I think that we will experientially remember more of your story, perhaps in an hour or 2 after the presentation, when we get a chance to filter and absorb all you've shared. May we all walk away with renewed hope and understanding of each other. And thank you so much again, Bergen Community College, for enabling this to happen.
Thank you, everybody who attended, and I will post the recording on the Bergen website. So I'm going to say goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you,
Everybody.
the Holocaust Council.
Yes, the Holocaust Council, thank you so much, of Metro West.
And thank you all for attending Bergen Community College, and Beverly and Marjorie and everybody else, and Joshua. I'm having a little, I'm not seeing all the pictures on WebEx. I'm not sure I know how to use, but it's working.
Yeah, the people are sending you lots of love from the attendees. They won't forget you.
See, I know how to use.
Well, because I have access to the chat. I don't know if you do, but I can forward it to you.
All right, I'd appreciate it because I'm used to the technology of Zoom. I have to learn this technology.
And everybody, beware of what you see on TV. Have a critical eye. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, thank you.